Hello everyone, today we read and comment on the 12th paragraph of the first chapter of the first book of von Clausewitz, Vom Kriege. A suspension in the action of war, unexplained by anything said as yet. So, here we go. A suspension in the action of war, unexplained by anything said as yet. However insignificant the political claims mutually advanced, however weak the means put forth, however small the aim to which military action is directed, can this action be suspended even for a moment? This is a question which penetrates deeply into the nature of the subject. Every transaction requires for its accomplishment a certain time which we call its duration. This may be longer or shorter according as the person acting throws more or less dispatch into his movements. About this more or less we shall not trouble ourselves here. Each person acts in his own fashion, but the slow person does not protract the thing because he wishes to spend more time about it, but because by his nature he requires more time, and if he made more haste would not do the thing so well. This time, therefore, depends on subjective causes and belongs to the length, so-called, of the action. If we allow now to every action in war this, its length, then we must assume, at first sight at least, that any expenditure of time beyond this length, that is, every suspension of hostile action, appears an absurdity. With respect to this, it must not be forgotten that we now speak not of the progress of one or the other of the two opponents, but of the general progress of the whole action of the war. So this paragraph is kind of particular because it's a big question point fundamentally. Von Clausewitz is wondering whether there could be fundamentally the action of war can be suspended even for a moment. While it's being carried out. Actually, this paragraph should be read in pair with the following one, with the 13th, that is fundamentally the answer to this question, which we're gonna read another time, but sorry, if you're interested, this we will say it fundamentally in the expectation of a more favorable moment. So now it's relatively complicated to explain given that we have not read the text, but fundamentally, yes, there is a moment in which in real war you can kind of suspend the action because this action has a length, and during this length there can be certain phases into which, because of the changes that can arrive, you can fundamentally suspend the action of war, or at least waiting for delivering it in a more favorable condition rather than just moment, actually, because here we're still in the relatively in the realm of theory. Von Clausewitz is deeply, getting into touch fundamentally with what happens for real, and he had to start. We've seen it in this very first paragraph of the Vom Kriege, how to get there from a logical point of view. Always given that theory and practice are never disjuncted in here. So the whatever you read in here is, especially in the 12th paragraph now, is kind of a big question which is still relatively theoretical, because the conclusion he gets to this paragraph is the conclusion from Clausewitz founds on what he has just said before. In fact, the same title is a statement of this. In other words, what we have said up to now doesn't yet fundamentally explain the suspension of the action of war into this relatively, theoretical and simple picture that we have drawn for now. So he's getting there. Nevertheless, in this paragraph there are a bunch of, as always, very interesting things that in this sense are relatively difficult to comment. Now, I think if you followed the series up to now, you realize that there is a kind of swinging fundamentally between what can happen in theory, what happens in practice, because theoretically, there is a tension towards the extremes, as we've seen in war, and certain things can happen, and most of the times they're mitigated fundamentally. And what von Clausewitz is interesting in doing here is, albeit providing this kind of theoretical background, however, to explain why on the base of this certain things happen the way they do. So he poses this question by saying, can really a suspension in action of war can happen given that, for example, the political claims can be insignificant, considering the political claims of both both states fundamentally. That means that the use can be, their put forth can be weak, that the aim to which military action is directed is small. So can these factors fundamentally bring to the action of war, so the strictly military action, to be suspended even for a moment? He says this is a question which penetrates deeply into the nature of the subject. He says very cleverly that every transaction, whichever it is, requires for its accomplishment a certain time, which we call its duration. Now this is particularly important because you see here how von Clausewitz step after step adds fundamentally new elements, I would say, not even factors, but what really intervenes into this system from the increasingly less theoretical picture he has drawn now. So there is a duration. As we've seen, war is, we have seen it in previous paragraphs, it has fundamentally this given time that has to happen. Of course, everything needs a time to be carried out. But it is meaningful because we have seen that fundamentally the two wrestlers, the two actors that are at war, are not just acting in virtue of their own force, of an objective that is passive, but with a reciprocal action, basing themselves on what the other does fundamentally. So every action, here we're going deeper in that, so that entailed that fundamentally, and there are, naturally we've seen how external elements can interfere into the fight, so the time delays over time. It expands also because of the uncertainty of the outcome, that in this sense cannot be fully foreseen. Von Clausewitz will be much clearer in detail. The more we go on, we'll see that. Here he adds finally another more concrete and evident element that we have already seen, that every action, every transaction here, as he calls it, so every passage fundamentally that we can, I don't remember how he calls it in German, whatever, takes a time. So it's normal, it's natural. You have to put something in motion fundamentally. And the completion. Here it says, jede Handlung braucht zu ihrer Vollziehung eine gewisse Zeit. So for its completion, for being achieved, in fact, it takes a certain time. So to make it banal, if you want to storm an MG nest, you have to take given time to get there, to bomb it, to whatever. So this takes a given time. And naturally, this time, even if the whole system was isolated, as you understand, it can fluctuate because you don't know what may happen. There is a random, amount of elements, of chance fundamentally in this system that can make all of these variables actually make it swing quite dramatically. And this time is called duration. So we actually can measure it. We can measure how much an operation takes. We can assume on this base that we have to wait to have a given time before carrying out something. This is particularly important because this eventually will be intertwined with so many other actions, so many other operations. So here simply, this may be longer or shorter according as the person acting throws more or less dispatch into his movements. So this is very very evident. The every person here the variable is the subject, let's say, as an actor fundamentally, that is can put more or less Eile in German would be something like haste fundamentally. When you say es hat keine Eile, it basically means it's not urgent, so this is also particularly important because just in the previous paragraphs we have seen that aside from the strictly military thing, the political influence on this action is always there. So you can't considerate any military action without a political influence on it at all times. There is nothing like a military operation that is carried out without control or modification by politics. It doesn't exist in the realm of reality, in fact. So here, the haste, as he calls it, is fundamentally a decision. Also in here, it's not really something that it can depend on many factors. Here, the idea is put as a sort of as if the person was fully in control of the situation, could decide whether to deliver more or less speed to the process, and to make the duration kind of smaller. But Von Clausewitz says this is kind of self-evident. So about this, more or less, we shall not trouble ourselves here, as each person acts in his own fashion, quite realistically, but this low person does not protract the thing because he wishes to spend more time about it, but because by his nature he requires more time, and if he made more haste would not do the thing so well. This time, therefore, depends on subjective causes and belongs to the length, so-called, of the action. So this is also an important distinction, because at this point there is also another factor into the equation. The duration is different from the length, fundamentally, because the duration can be given theoretically as something fixed. So it's as if there was a standard, fundamentally. You have a given time to carry out certain things. This is also, in military regulations, in training, etc. There are certain standards you have to meet. Now, this is more evident with small things, like, how much time should take for you to reload a gun or stuff like that. But so that you can fire that gun at a certain rate of fire, and therefore to have even a sort of homogeneity, of course. So the personnel is trained in this. However, seen on the bigger scale, this is particularly important because the duration of an operation is something that naturally is bigger. So the duration is even longer, even in actual time. But there can be fundamentally, as we've seen, more or less haste to do it. At that point, perhaps also the operation can be launched more or less, sooner or later, fundamentally. And at that point, this doesn't necessarily mean that the duration gets modified, because theoretically, if you know how to carry out the thing, you can think that, okay, that will take a certain amount of time, and I already know it. The problem here that von Clausewitz is differentiating is how much fundamentally this takes, given this kind of standard the standard function, standard equation, let's say, out of the system. So basically here, I mean, not really out of the system, but as if it was given for granted. So here is measuring fundamentally how much it actually takes for someone to carry out that action. So there are people who are kind of more capable, less capable. So you can have a duration that is given for standard, but the more capable person is going to carry it out probably in time, if not even more quickly and more efficiently. Also depends in here on the efficiency in many ways. But the incapable person will probably take more time to do it. The length of an action can vary fundamentally, aside from its duration, on the base of how much time it actually takes to you to achieve a certain thing. And everybody can relate, because this happens in every moment in life. So it's kind of obvious is that when you have here it says the slow person does not protect the thing because he wishes to spend more time about it, but because by his nature he requires more time. And if he made more haste, would not do the thing so well. I perfectly understand this personally, because I take a given time to do certain things, my work, or even preparing Schwerpunkt videos, etc. And I realize I could be much quicker, but I take my own time because I already know that fundamentally you need it. And I do it on naturally using myself as a measure, so that I can rely on myself. If I were another person, I would naturally make the thing in a different way. It would take me less time or more time, depending on what this person does. So at this point, it has nothing to do with the kind of duration that is given for, as an average, but it has to do with how much the individual basically takes to accomplish a certain thing. And here von Clausewitz even adds a further concept that normally, especially given the kind of pressure that exists in certain circumstances, like war, but like any other fundamentally. So, as if in a condition in which we could even eliminate the let's say the free time available to do other things. So when you're presented with a deadline fundamentally, and before that given moment you have to have the work done, there are people who take more time to take the whole thing out, to carry the whole thing out, because simply they realize that if they were in haste, they would do worse, and therefore they need to take that amount of time to achieve what they want well. So here is another very good example how there is not a standard in so many factors, basically in every single action that you want to carry out, so that every fighter, we can say, is kind of different, and this brings to a if not to unpredictability, which definitely happens in reality because you can't know everything, but at least in order to compensate for the latter, at least you have to add to the equation the knowledge about who is actually do the thing, because that in fact influences the outcome. So it's something you have to be aware. This is something that every kind of commander kind of knows about his troops, how they react under test, under stress. And so this also takes an extra time that goes beyond the actual duration that is given by standard for, and this, as you can understand, can vary wildly also on the base of whatever happens out there in the same fight. So it's obvious that you have fresh troops who will carry out that action given kind of theoretical unmodified situation than troops that are tired, and many other. This is just an example. I can make it so many. So there are so many factors that influence, and that do not just influence mechanically, mathematically, but they also entail that from the other side there is a person that takes these factors by experience into consideration and therefore modifies his abilities to, his planning at the end of the day, because this is what it is, to carry out that operation. So, von Clausewitz adds, in fact, this, we also read it, but this is fundamentally a subjective cause. This is subjective, and this determines eventually the length more than the duration of the operation, of the action. So then he says, if we allow now to every action in war its length, then we must assume, at first sight at least, that any expenditure of time beyond this length, that is, every suspension of hostile action, appears an absurdity. With respect to this, it must not be forgotten that we now speak not of the progress of one or other of the two opponents, but of the general progress of the whole action of the war. So, here von Clausewitz is making a very important consideration and kind of reassessing the several things that he in part has only hinted to in a way, but that are fundamentally very important. That is, that first of all there is a positive intent into war. We'll see now also next time in the 13th paragraph. He I don't remember where he talks about this. Let me check. Yes, yes, he does. The positive intent. There is someone, for instance, that is that has the initiative in war. So, but this initiative is calibrated on also what the opponent is doing. So the concept here is that given that you have a duration of an action that should be given kind of not for granted, but should be calculated theoretically, and then you have a length for you have an individual that is fundamentally unique in his own way to carry it out. You have this already with the length beyond the duration in an extension fundamentally of time that is kind of lost, because at that point it's as if it was the fault of the individual was not quick enough, fundamentally it is not able enough, that prolongs in this sense the act of war by increasing the length of the military action. And therefore, given that there is this constant pressure posed by the fact also that here von Clausewitz doesn't talk about it, but the enemy can react. If you take if it takes more time for you to achieve a certain thing, the enemy is you're fundamentally giving free time to the enemy to and in part therefore making him strengthening, hopefully, since he that's what he does at all times, even if he might not be very capable as well. So given what it's been told up to this point, up to this system that we have tried to observe now, up to the 12th paragraph, it's an absurdity to suspend the hostile action. That is fundamentally to add extra time to the carrying out of the operation beyond this length that is already fundamentally what you add as a I can say just as an attrition factor, but in general as a deficiency of your abilities. That is, however, relative, of course, because in fact every person is different, so you will always find someone who is better than you or worse than you at certain things, unless you're not, there is a chance over, I don't know how many billions we are on planet. But even von Clausewitz would say, in fact, even the same person has a different reaction to this. If I'm not wrong, it was the previous paragraph in which he said, that every action in that case, it was the political decision but it can be extended in general to every action, can have an effect on a person that differs on the basis of the when you do it. So that is also important, because even the most capable commander put in a certain situation can be also less effective than the one that up to now has not been quite as good as him. So the moral of the story is that given these lengths of these actions that now are still relatively theoretical, as we've seen, it doesn't make sense by anything we already said to delay further the accomplishment of the action. There is no valid reason. It's an absurdity. And in fact, this is kind of valid in general, because von Clausewitz really believes actually that in fact delaying any kind of operation in theory, when you have, given that you have acquired enough time, is kind of a negative thing to do in general. Von Clausewitz has this tendency that is not really subjective in here, it's motivated for solving the action quickly. So even if it's a risk, it doesn't matter. You know, most of the times in war, the more you wait, fundamentally, and the more you weaken yourself, the more you consume energies. And this is valid. Naturally, this is a general rule. It doesn't mean von Clausewitz goes for general rules. This is also the greatness of the system, that it doesn't tell you, you have to act in this time always in the same way. It doesn't exist in reality. Reality cannot cope with this, but in general, that should be your aim, because the more time passes, fundamentally, the more the system degenerates, it decays. It's actually a physical law. So the best result is tendentially the one that you can achieve as soon as possible. Naturally, in war, this is all mitigated, in fact, by the obvious consideration that everything changes around you. So there may be situations, in fact, the more favorable moment for action that von Clausewitz, to which von Clausewitz dedicates the next paragraph, that is the only kind of legitimate reason for not just even delaying, but actually suspending in this sense, which is kind of the same thing given the definition we already read, because here it says, does not protract, that any expenditure of time beyond this length is every suspension of style action. Is useless, is harmful. Actually, it's harmful for you, but there can be situations in which that can, in fact, be more favorable for you, because there is another opportunity that is going to open there. Naturally, you can be lucky, you're not so, but this all depends on on the circumstances. But in general, as a general rule, that's how war works. So this is important because it's an absolute instead. Even if it's tendential, it's kind of probabilistic, let's say. But it all depends on the forces that are applied and what the general situation is, what you can hope to accomplish in this given situation. And what else was I about to say? I don't really remember now, but I mean, the concept is very clear. By the way, yes, I wanted to stress here how fundamentally von Clausewitz equates the expenditure of time beyond length, the length that exists in every action in war, given the subjective causes of the situation, as a suspension of a style action. This is also very important because, in fact, in war, there is not such a thing like a continuous action. This is very evident. I mean, there are circumstances in which you can even, you know, you know, dialogue with the enemy in a certain case. Kind of very evident historically in many cases. And the only reason for that is that there is a more favorable opportunity that presents itself that makes you kind of in a better shape, in a better condition to eventually act more effectively. So it's kind of interesting also because this reveals that that war has kind of very general, it has kind of rules that are never to be are never betrayed. And I'm not talking here in terms of of individual choice. This is also what von Clausewitz shows pretty evidently, is that war is not a matter of how you actually decide to fight it. I mean, of course, yes, from one side, he also stresses the fact that you are the one who molds the situation for what you can. But he's also telling you that in real war, like in the ones that are actually fought, there is no one who is waiting there saying, okay, should I use hostile action or not? I mean, it's like the hostile intent, the destructiveness of war fundamentally is always out there. There can be moments in which we like to emphasize, like, humanity in war. These guys, I don't know, they like the trench, the Christmas truce of the frontiers, in the trenches in World War I, the French and the Germans familiarizing, okay, but yeah, they kept slaughtering each other eventually. And guess what? That was not an option. So, aside from very interesting anthropological conception you can make there, that is fundamentally that humans can even fraternize but still killing each other given different circumstances that can also be relatively similar to each other and close in time to each other, but that war is conducted by in real life by social groups, always kind of with those dynamics. This is particularly interesting. So von Clausewitz maintains this theoretical absolute rule that naturally gets modulated by that constantly transforms into something different into real war. But even in this relative circumstances, in these relative situations, still war kind of follows certain patterns, certain actions that are kind of very, very similar into history, and that do not seem to have changed substantially up to this point. So that the brutality of war, the idea of you killing your neighbor and feeling hate, feeling despair, being in despair, killing, hating, destroying, kind of saying, okay, whatever. I mean, there are. It's alarming for many people to think how easy it is actually for humans to kill. They think it's something terrible, that if you cross the line, it takes so much courage to do. No, sadly enough, but interestingly enough, humans, if put in certain situations, are capable of killing like even at 3 seconds of distance. Like, we are programmed biologically to be able to do it, and it takes much less than you imagine. It's not really whether you are kind of under threat yourself of life. You can also have this disproportionate degree of violence. I think, in fact, what delivered on your neighbor. In fact, what I think, but I should get more informed about this, is that actually the greatest traumas in war do not even derive from actual killing someone or delivering that kind of violence, which surely is something dramatic, something traumatizing in many cases, and so on. But the actual trauma derives from the constant exposure to danger. So a psychological pressure that basically traumatizes you for real. I mean, that has a real overwhelming impact on your psyche, and that makes you shocked, because that's what it is, and you can't cope with. In fact, even if you there are so many interesting. I've been watching for some time in the past some interviews to. They were actually mostly Vietnam veterans, and what I found very interesting in there is that they weren't actually much stressing the fact of having killed as the most kind of the most traumatic. It was the whole system. It was the dual exposure to that kind of constant threat, violence, and this suspended state of being that knows it can be killed from one moment to another and has to react, to cope, and to act quickly. Not that they weren't traumatized by having killed people. There were some that were heavily traumatized by that, but at the same time, it wasn't for most the part of the equation. They weren't even mentioning it sometimes. Maybe because it was traumatic. Actually, I don't want to say something that now I don't know from those specific interviews, but that wasn't actually the salient point for most of them. I mean, they were suffering even naturally of seeing other people getting killed, like friends. But at the same time, a war is carried out fundamentally in a way that humans have already done relatively easily, and that it kind of works all the time in spite of the natural attrition factors and so on that also intervene. Also, humans are not really made for killing each other so quickly. They're not. But that's what in fact reveals the relative ease which in certain conditions it's done, because that reveals not that humans are actually much bloodthirsty, because we're not really much, but how pressured those individuals were in the moment in which they were required to kill so quickly. And that's what, in fact, really is really astonishing, in my opinion, and it's definitely so interesting at the same time. Because at that point, you realize it's not even a matter of the individual, but it's as if there was a social force. I mean, war is carried out by political, social groups. We're not talking about just of course, von Clausewitz puts it as if war was, as a matter of fact, just a duel on a greater scale. So it's always the individual that maintains the protagonism to this. But what I wanted to stress now is how war is fundamentally delivered in an organized fashion that has certain mechanisms that you can't escape, and they're not gonna stop in the face of anyone. Which makes war, in this sense, the face of war, so dramatic. Because you realize at that point that there is a sort of faceless actor that is moving that whole amount of men that are gonna kill each other. I mean, not kill each other, I mean killing someone else, of course, from the other side, but still killing other fellow human beings that just do it because they're brought there. And I would say that the most interesting part of this is that for many people it's difficult to conceive. I mean, not really the most interesting part, but kind of the even more worrying, I would say, part of it, because a war is misunderstood in this sense. It's not really seen for what it is. It's really, when you look at war and say you're just fighting here for someone else, that can happen for political reasons. That definitely you're sent to fight and die for causes that you don't really care much about. But at the same time, there is still as humanity, as large human groups, there's still certain dynamics that in this sense are perfectly human and perfectly natural. And war, as one of them, is really this one. War is one of the most human things that exists, probably, actually, and this is what is often misunderstood. talking about that war is inhuman. It's just actually a misconception. It's not that war is inhuman. It's just very different from what you're used to in what should be a normal, peaceful condition. But it's not inhuman because it happens. A storm is inhuman. A volcano eruption is inhuman because that has nothing to do with that. But war is driven by humans and is carried out by humans literally at every single level. So how is that inhuman actually? It's brutal, it's violent, it's mercilessly, it's horrible, it's traumatizing, it's something you wouldn't be in, but it's still human. One of the most human things ever. And that's really the point, because if you that's I think the main problem is if you dehumanize war, you deresponsibilizes yourself, because you take away the part of humanity from that. I mean, you're actually the one that by calling a war inhuman, you're kind of dehumanizing in the sense of feelings of philanthropic sense what is happening on a battlefield, because you're simply saying it's as if I don't even care what are the reasons that brought to this, and by doing this you're legitimately trying to get irresponsible for that, while you actually maybe pay taxes or however you feed a state that is carrying out that war. And of course you can go against war in this sense, but if you don't even try to understand why war is fought, or what the political options are, or whatever, you also can't fundamentally make the right choice into that direction. Because there are wars that are clamorous failures, and that most of the times are actually first, and as always I would say first, political failures. There are other wars that are kind of necessary, and I don't know, take World War II in from the Allies' perspective. I mean, wouldn't you fight actually for world freedom? Because that's what it was at the time. To be honest, I mean, there is not many other ways you can interpret that, unless you're a kind of a grossly misinformed and ideologized person. But that's it. I'm not saying I would have personally had the guts to say at that time, I will go to war without problems, because that's also another thing. War is tough. It's not a game. It has some game features. Actually, we will see it in Von Clausewitz. That is also quite interesting. But it takes your own participation. Takes your own choice, your own, putting at stake something it's not something you can give for granted. Just like something that happens because some evil, greedy person decided that you have to make war. You are kind of relatively in charge, or however, you have still the political influence to have your say on a certain thing. If your position on war is let's make or not make war just because I don't know what war is, but it kind of sounds respectively bad or good or evil, sorry. You don't know what you're doing. That's why, in my opinion, we should all read and study von Clausewitz and try to get rid of any ideological barrier, any kind of preconception of prejudice, and evaluating war not as a moral or an immoral thing in itself, but the political decision that causes the war to be where you should actually talk about that. Because war in itself, just remember, is just a tool. It's just an instrument. That's what it is. War in itself doesn't exist if you don't put it in motion with actions, with will, with intentions. It's like a weapon, if you really want to put it, banally. But it's what it is. It makes a freaking good amount of difference if you kill, an innocent person because you're a lunatic, or if you kill a lunatic in the sense that it is evidently threatening the life of someone else. That's where the moral thing goes in. It's not the gun. It's you who makes the decision. So the result, there are a lot of blinkers, I believe, and narrow-mindedness that actually stems from not having reflected thoroughly on what violence is. That's at least my opinion. And I would say that today we live in a world where this is increasingly needed, because we also we actually have more freedom, at least for now, in the sense that, okay, I'm not a catastrophist. I don't think that freedom will be sensibly reduced in the next years, but we do have a say compared to the past, which is kind of more evident. Whether you can participate to democratic debate, perhaps we're less individually influenced in the sense that we are more people, but this in fact presents more problems in terms of actual social science, political science, to figure out what's the best option, how how people should relate to the group, to politics, to this kind of action. But we also have a greater influence actually on certain actions, also because of technology. We have seen now how wars are really fought. Most of wars are fought actually not on battlefields anymore. Literally, they're fought through informatics, and that's war. The Clausewitzian paradigmas, the Clausewitzian theory, do not change not even a tiny bit in the digital age. On the contrary, they're brutally reconfirmed, and it's important because we underestimate this. And this is also a great problem of our times, is that we are lacking constantly direct control on the outcome of our actions. This is very important. This happens a bit in every field, like in the environmental problems, in everything really, because we give for granted that the world is the way it is because it's fine, it's cool, because we made it. We live in a kind of a democratic world. Everything is fine. Everybody more or less, even the most poor people in the West are kind of privileged compared to what it was like 70 years ago. Everything seems to be better than ever, but yet there are responsibilities that have increased and that we completely lost sight of. This is dramatic. This is really dramatic, in my opinion. I don't know whether it's better or worse than in the past, because the past wasn't kind of that better actually at all. I don't believe we will actually live in a worse period than in the past. So even those people who kind of fought for a better world in the past were doing it for kind of our reasons. They also hold certain beliefs that we would find pretty disturbing by certain standards, because the world changes. It's perfectly normal. But now we are facing new challenges that are not less threatening in proportion than the ones that we were facing at the time of our parents during Cold War, grandparents during World War II, and so on. So I firmly believe that this is a moment of great need of the Clausewitzian theory, because it tells it all. Without any ideologism, without any personal interest, without any... That's a guy. That's what it is. I don't know how many of you... I noticed that you personally don't like... at least most of my viewers do not like much my Vom Clausewitz series, and my Vom Kriege series, actually, because we're actually reading just this, not talking about von Clausewitz in general, but still, obviously, the Vom Kriege is von Clausewitz legitimately as the most important work, the most echoing, the most relevant in absolute terms. And I do understand it, because most of you like things like history videos, which there is me rambling literally for hours about, I don't know, the Franks, the Byzantines and stuff like that. But first of all, I would say you lose a great part of it, you know, of the importance of those stories if you actually do not have clear in mind the relations that exist between between politics, war, society, and stuff like that. Because otherwise, it's a story like anyone else's, and I try to make it different. Also from kind of this point of view. I mean, of course, there's plenty of people out there who even tell things way better than I do. But this Von Kriege's series is not watched. I see it from the stats. I see it even from the banally the views I get, because there are reasons, of course. But after all, isn't this why you come here? I mean, I believe legitimately that people who come here on channels like mine, or like is that you want to find someone who tells you things that you deem to be reliable, fundamentally. Not that are true, because I doubt that anyone even thinks about it, but especially in my case, I don't know why, but I never see myself as, I never tell you this is true, you know, this is still kind of, everything is kind of debatable, but I mean, from my perspective, I still try to make it kind of reliable in the essential. Not just because I heard a story and I tell it to you the way I've heard it, and you know, yeah, it's kind of knowledge and that's it. No, I tell it to you because I try to criticize it on the base of this even theoretical. You can't lack theory. You can't just listen to a story because, I don't know, it talks about your country or stuff like that. I don't know what the reasons will move you to learn about whatever. Seems that people will just join my channel chiefly for the Franks and the Byzantines and the Seljuks. So I think it's chiefly driven by not really chauvinistic reasons, because of course there are plenty of reasons why for liking those, but it's mostly because, oh, look, those are my guys, that's my team, that's my flag, and stuff like that. Someone talks about it, so it's cool. That's the main prevalent attitude. It's very fanboyistic in many ways, on average, and I'm sure, you know, I see it. Actually, most of my subscribers that speak up in the comments are kind of very valuable minds and people who know that their stories as well. So I have a great appreciation towards them. So I also take the chance to thank them for all the beautiful contributions they make to the channel, through the comments, the likes, the shares. It's great. I'm very happy. But if you're listening, please, which you are doing, of course, if you can hear me, but in general, please watch these videos of Von Clausewitz. Okay, they may not be so, but entertaining at the beginning, but once you get it on the right track, you find in Von Clausewitz someone that is really reliable. Someone really tells you reality as it is. Isn't it what you're searching for on the internet? Let's be honest about it. Don't you want the precious treasure that nobody knows, that you can access, you can draw riches from? That's it. That's what the Vom Kriege is. So aside from my videos in general, just pick up the Vom Kriege and study it. And especially try to be humble, try to be modest. I personally, there are several things about the Vom Kriege that I probably also misinterpret, I know, but I stay in this sense open. I say, okay, maybe I don't know whether I got this right, you know. It happens because it's a very difficult text. It's not easy. If you have difficulties with Von Clausewitz, just know that you're definitely not alone, because there is not a single person who has studied von Clausewitz has not had at least difficulties to learn it. It's perfectly normal, because von Clausewitz was a hell of a mind, and I can grant you that if you study him, if you don't understand something, it's not because he's wrong. It's because fundamentally you're stupid. You can't get to what he's saying, because once that is explained to you, everything makes sense. And remember, that is valid for even some of the greatest military theorists of his time, like Jomini, that at the beginning was kind of the greatest, criticizer of von Clausewitz. But eventually he recognized his own genius, and he was the top leader kind of the other side of the barricade, let's say that, and that proved he was actually a very smart man as well, Antoine Henri de Jomini, as well, and he recognized von Clausewitz's genius. And you know why? You know what? Sorry. You know why is this happening? Because it's easy, and it happens all the time. Believe me, that when you find someone intelligent that is actually making a point, has the right thing, there's always someone. First of all, it's difficult to understand, because normally the genius is beyond, right? And other people do not. It's normal that when they are acquainted with his theory, they say, okay, this is garbage. They start mocking and persecuting, saying nasty stuff. This happens all the time. And why is that? Because they don't understand it. And we know it. This happens in this way for everyone, every human being. Whatever you don't know, something potentially threatening. That's how we were molded biologically through evolution. That everything we don't know is kind of, that's kind of mysterious, dangerous. That's better to stay away. Let's demonize it. Then when you know it, when you acquire that knowledge, you say, wow, did I miss this? That's what happens with von Clausewitz, I believe, and that's why it's plenty of people who still today, ridiculously in the 21st century, still believe that there is an alternative to von Clausewitz. And I know it's a hard statement to make, but believe me, I basically, I'm not a person who follows others. Never. I don't have idols, I don't have icons, I don't have myths, I don't have, I've never followed and never actually wanted to be like anyone else. I always wanted to do things on my own, chiefly on my own, even too much on my own. But von Clausewitz stands out because I still maintain obviously a detached attitude towards him, but he's really the one you can always rely on, because he's never wrong, basically. And you can fact check that. It's not a matter of sympathy. It has nothing to do with that. I don't know. If I had met von Clausewitz, maybe I would have not even liked him. I don't know. Would be I don't know what I'd give to have met von Clausewitz, but that's another point. The point is, this is a matter of what he wrote and what you can access and what you can study. So it's really a pity, in my opinion, if you don't do it, and if you preclude yourself the opportunity to embrace his theory, because on the base of moral grounds, of ideological grounds, because this is what happened with culturalism. This is what happened with many others that basically criticized von Clausewitz without not even having read him. And it's actually embarrassing to see this. It's embarrassing to see how often this has actually happened, and by certain standards still happens. People will look von Clausewitz from top to bottom, like saying saying, who is this guy? Who's weird with his writings? I know best. It's full of people like that. Well, just know that those people are kind of probably have never read von Clausewitz, and that's or studied, because that's I so often say that's the point. So he is an example of why you have to stay humble all the time. If you want to learn, actually, that's a precondition for learning. You have to stay humble. You have to stay open. You don't have to take knowledge aggressively, because you have to calm down. You have to solve problems of your own and take knowledge from what it is, not from what you wish it to be. Because I believe that 80% of the people do it instead, and they screw the world, because that's really it. If the world really goes really bad, it's because people think they know best without knowing a damn thing. That's, the number one problem of humanity, and it's always been. Von Clausewitz is a good antidote in himself for that, both methodologically, because it shows you, step by step how things should be done. Secondly, also continuistically, and substantially, because his theory is more than just logical chains, and many people believe that he is a kind of a very boring read, because he talks about theoretically. If you start reading the first paragraphs, you say, oh wow, boring, which is not telling the truth, because for me at least, the first paragraphs are like, oh my god, they're kind of a divine sap of some sort, because that's glorious in the way he proceeds. But even if you are kind of more instinctual, in the sense you're more sensitive, emotional, romantic, whatever you want to call it, the more you progress, actually, more you see von Clausewitz makes an enormous amount even of very, very simple examples, using simple metaphors, simple language, to describe to you how it really is. There is the passage, for instance, I don't remember in which, I think it's still in the first book, when he talks about how it is to approach the war front. He literally tells you, you approach it, obviously for the war of his time. That, however, you get there, start seeing bombs falling every once in a while. Then you approach another bit of kilometers, and you start seeing, every once in a while, someone hit around you. And you go to the first line, you see fire, bullets whistling all around, people falling, people hurt, shouts, confusion. Because he actually had been into that. That's also often something we underestimate, is that we should listen to people who have been through, in the case of von Clausewitz, literally every single war of coalition against Napoleon, or actually the French Republic at the beginning, in the first coalition, and so from the first coalition. So that's not really a person you would say, "Who is this guy?" This happens with many authors. You would say, well, is this just a thinker? Someone was sitting on a chair. This is a person who's been in first person into some of the bloodiest affairs of human history. So you would like to take from him, I believe. If anything, tendentially, you should lend your ear to him, what he has to say, just for that, but there is too much ideologism today, for which we idealize and idolize certain figures only on the basis of what your tribe fundamentally is, and you don't want to listen to anyone else. And it's not that we ever got rid of it, but it seems today it's kind of re-intensifying. And this is bad, because it's actually threatening for our civilization, in my opinion. But whatever. I want to be not really optimistic, because being optimistic is as bad as being pessimistic, but really being realistic and say, okay, well, maybe it's not so. I don't really know it for sure. Whatever. I'm not a sociologist after all. And so, okay, well, and you realize that I spend a lot of time actually talking about other things rather than these paragraphs, but it always comes natural to me. Many of you would be surprised to know that I'm not a great speaker in everyday life, but when I read these things, I I really, it feels so natural to simply comment on them and to tell so many other things about it, because really there are so many inspiring ideas and thoughts, and we should discuss actually about it more than just saying, okay, I study von Clausewitz for myself. But I actually want also to talk about other things. I want to talk about war. I want to talk about politics. I want to talk about society. I want to talk about history, military history, history of the military art, whatever you prefer, as long as you progress under this point of view. And it's embarrassing, in my opinion, how we also, I mean, von Clausewitz is a massively important author in Western civilization now, but it's not that given his, I believe that given his importance, we actually don't talk about him that much. Really not that much. I know that there are certain beautiful books, maybe I will comment on them. They're coming out now. One is it from a whatever. I mean, people write about von Clausewitz, but it's still not a very popular thinker. Just remember the first phrase: the war is nothing but the continuation of politics by other means. That's pretty much it. What else about von Clausewitz? There are so many. By the way, beware of many memes that circulate, say actually very wrong things about von Clausewitz. The worst one is the one that says the best way, the best form of defense is attack. Von Clausewitz literally states that the best form of defense is defense, literally, and it's actually obvious. I mean, yeah, maybe not intuitive, but believe me, it is obvious. But you find this meme. I googled that the other day. I think I was checking some things, and it popped out and said, "What the hell?" So you find, I don't know, legitimately thousands of people will go out there having read that and thinking that von Clausewitz literally stated that, whatever. In that sense, at least, there can be, attacks that are kind of better than defense in a certain circumstance, but in general, as a general rule, the best form of defense is defense. Otherwise, it wouldn't be defense. But we'll get to that. So for now, I just stop here. Today, I actually wanted to talk about the Nizarites, the order of the assassins. I will hopefully do it tomorrow, but I hadn't prepared that much, and today was kind of tired, had a bit of a headache, so I skipped it. But it's always a pleasure to talk about von Clausewitz, and tomorrow perhaps we'll get back with that. Okay, so and next time with von Clausewitz, we will see actually that there is only one cause which can suspend the action, and this seems to be only possible on one side in any case. And this is about the expectation of a more favorable moment. Just spoilering a little bit, but I already did during the video before. Okay, so for now, as always, I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it, otherwise leave a like, or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming contents. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.